and we'll see how this goes.
Okay.
Welcome to the very first live podcast of All Things Nonlinear Dynamical, talks about the brain and human connection. This show tackles the big questions: overcoming challenges, mental well-being, the power of music and literature, and even cutting-edge brain training tech. Join Craig de Servidor and his special and amazing guests as they explore the physical and mental landscapes that make us who we are, offering practical tools and broad perspectives to help you navigate your own unique journey. It's going to get weird, it's going to get wonderful, so buckle up and get ready to explore the incredible world within. Tonight's extra special guest is Valdeane W. Brown, Doctor of Philosophy. Val is the co-founder of the Zengar Institute Incorporated and the co-developer of Neuroptimal. This is a real treat because Val will explain what nonlinear dynamical is all about and help us understand it and offer so much more tonight. And now, off to our brilliant show host, Craig de Servidor, to get this candle properly lit. Off to you, Craig.
Thank you, Freddie. Hey, welcome to Val. How are you?
I'm good. I'm here in Washington, D.C., actually Silver Spring, Maryland, to be precise, just outside of D.C., where I grew up. I'm in my sister's house, and I'm here visiting her, and I'll be here actually till our shared birthdays on June 12th.
Oh, how wonderful. Happy birthday.
Thank you. I was the guy who screwed up her 4th birthday party, because, she's 4 years older, and that's been the family joke for a long time between my sister and I. Sheree is her name. And I'd say, hey, give me a break. All right. Mom had a car accident. All right. Like, I was just along for the ride. I came out breech, hit the deck on my feet, and just kept running. I haven't stopped yet. So, anyway.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Quite a story there. Quite a beginning. An auspicious beginning. So Val, could you just give us your background? And I know it's very vast in many ways, but I think everybody would like to do that.
How many hours you got? Yeah, really. Yeah, I know. I kind of all my life. I remember when I was, I think 8, and I was sort of asked, well, what do you really want to do, when you grow up? Because growing up when I did, with the cohort that I did in D.C., it was an amazing time. I mean, it was, John Kennedy's The New Frontier and, the space program and just all this cutting edge stuff. And so, parents of friends of mine were, the folks making all that kind of stuff happen. And so it was just kind of cool to be there and hear the ideas and all of that. But that kind of started me when I got asked, well, what do you want to do? And I thought, I could do computers and I could do some other stuff, but sooner or later, those things are going to get done. They're going to get resolved. It's going to be like finished, or there'll be a finishing point. And what's the one that will go on forever? And in sort of the 8-year-old mind or language of mind, I said, well, the problem of mind, like, who are we inside and how does all that work? How does it work? So that really focused me in on becoming a psychologist, originally a psychiatrist, but then I realized I didn't really want to have to deal with meds because I knew that was the only reason I'd be becoming a physician, is to be able to prescribe or dispense. And by the time I was starting my training, there was in psychology as a then grad student, the expectation was that psychologists would get, the right to prescribe. Of course, that didn't happen in the U.S., but that was the expectation. So I had a very broad background. I was exposed to just enormous ranges of knowledge growing up. And I had a friend of mine whose father was the head of the publishing company that published PL1 manual for IBM, PL1 Programming Language 1. And he gave me the first copy. And he said, I know you'll have fun with this. I wish I still had that book. Okay. But I mean, that was the environment. And so is philosophy, and I studied yoga and Chinese martial arts since I was really young. It's sort of neighborhood stuff, almost like, Karate Kid, right? Wax on, wax off kind of thing. And went to Georgetown undergraduate, heard Carl Pribram speak, and that kind of cemented stuff for me. But there was just a lot going on in my background. And so it's always interesting for me when folks say, well, like, what do you do? Or where'd you come from? What's your background, kind of thing. I remember one other person in the neurofeedback field was a good colleague, friend, and all, and we were talking at one point, and he turned to me. We were in a group, and I was talking, and the group was mostly clinicians, as I remember it. But he turned to me at one point, and he said, "You're not an engineer?" And I went, "No, I'm not an engineer." He said, "Are you kidding? You sound just like an engineer when you and I talk." Well, that's because you're an engineer. You're a biomedical engineer. So I just, I speak your language, right? But how do you want me to say it? Like, I can say the same message in all different kinds of ways, right? And I think that's been both a blessing and a curse in some ways, because it's always been a challenge that in my professional arenas where I've really done the work that I've done, it's not that usual for others to have such a broad background. And so it becomes a challenge that, somebody who is specialized in some particular area can talk about it, and I can talk to the same kind of level that they do.
Right.
And it's a little bit disconcerting, for a lot of people. So that's always been sort of a background thing for me. So I don't know how much that helped, but
no, that's fantastic. I just wanted to kind of review with you, but for our listeners, how we met,
sure.
And just a little bit forward. I go back to February 7th, 2016, when I impulse purchased my very first unlimited. Well, it's now called unlimited. Then it was professional system, and that was after a demo with Jonathan Harris in Sacramento.
Right.
I brought my daughter, and I've always, since she was little, she has had a rough journey. Don't need to go into that, but as we were doing things to try to help her, she said to me, "I feel like a guinea pig."
Right.
And so I made a promise to her that I've kept to this day. I will not ask you to consider doing something that I wouldn't do myself, or that I will not do myself.
Right.
So, there's more to the story, but the bottom line was Jonathan. I brought Marissa there, and he offered. Jonathan Harris, but
right.
Really sweetheart of a man, an engineer, and but they made a connection afterward. But this very first meeting, she was just, I don't want to try it, and he offered a demo. And I said, "I'll take the demo.
I'll do this."
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And just a little brief background. I had SMR training, neurofeedback. Try to drop the high beta spindles at the top of my head and whatnot. With it. Didn't enjoy that at all, because it was too task oriented for me. And you may know them, two long timers, as Alan said, Dan Jorgensen and Claudia Hansen, who are now retired and doing Buddhist retreats. Well, Dan worked with me.
Right.
And after I had about 30 sessions, he said, let me have you try Alpha Theta training. And that grabbed me because I'm not a musician, but I do love music. And what I loved was taking those 3 notes to a chord, and it was uplifting. Now, I was able to take it with me because he allowed me to patch in with my recorder. So I was able to edit that audio, and but again, it was not a learning experience for me, but it was a fun experience.
It was fun, and that was a big part. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I hear for the very first time in the demo, I didn't know it was Jeff Bova. I didn't know Jeff Bova was a Grammy Award winning, producer, and so on and so forth. The music was just so gorgeous. And the interruptions, reminded me of my brother's copy of Jesus Christ Superstar back in 1970 version where I scratched it.
Scratch records. Yes, exactly. Right.
I was hooked. And I when I got home, I immediately got online, Neuroptimal.com. Oh my gosh, okay, well, I'm getting it. I don't care, right? I'll find a way.
Right.
And unfortunately, at the time, I didn't name Jonathan. So he was rather upset with me when he saw me posting questions and whatnot in the forum. We resolved that. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway. And then, I got to go to, here it is 2016, and I hear about the spring conference in Fort Lauderdale and the opportunity to come and meet people who are experienced. And, oh, my gosh, maybe I'll get up the courage to ask a question of Val.
Right.
And I was first in line, and I asked a question about line noise. And as everyone knows who knows you in regard to questions about line noise, bam, it's irrelevant.
Right, for us, for Neuroptimal, yes.
Sue took pity on me, but and then real briefly, you invited me into the beta group for NO3 on Facebook, January 29th, 2018. I was thrilled. I was, oh my God. Valdeane W. Brown, PhD, is not only inviting me into the group, but you upgraded my computer from V2 to NO3. Now here, my background, I have a former IT manager background. I was so embarrassed because I didn't clean my system up. And you had a devil of a time because I had too much media on it. It was all my fault.
Right. I remember.
But anyway, we started a wonderful journey, and I got to follow you around, notice what you were doing there. You were, heavy into development of your baby, right?
Right.
NO3, and answering every question by yourself on Facebook. And I'm like, hey, man, I got this great learning opportunity. I'm going to dive in just like I got first in line at the conference.
Right.
And I learned so much from you. And you were so compassionate if I put something in that wasn't correct. You weren't smacking me on the hand. You were, as you said, my stepladder. And I'm so grateful to you and thankful. And, and I'm just going to let you talk about NO3 and whatever you like from there. I have some questions, I might intersperse in there.
Okay.
But this is for you, not for me. This is for you.
I always like when it becomes a dialogue. And so, questions to kind of get that started, maybe, or questions as we go along. Yeah. But the idea is to kind of get to being back and forth, because for me, partly because of my Chan Buddhist, Zen in Japan, but Chan originally in China. I'm very interested in living words and very committed to that kind of thing. So it's not just, okay, here are the footprints left in the sand by the teacher, and I'll just put my feet in the same place. It's, what are the living words? You know, how do you catch the hua to? How do you catch the head of the thought? How do you get that and express it in a way that then a lot of the stuff falls apart, a lot of the presuppositions and beliefs, and new stuff happens. And, I had to laugh earlier when you sent me the Emily Latella clip, because I think, for those who don't know, from the earliest days of SNL, Saturday Night Live, it was a Gilda Radner character, of so many wonderful ones from her, but she was this little old lady who would always get things a little bit wrong, the way she would be saying it, and she'd get all fussy and all upset about it, and then Jane Curtin would have to go, no, Emily, you've got it wrong, it's not national racehorses, it's natural resources, right? And Emily would go, oh, that's different. Never mind. Right? And that little head tilt, it's a funny way of expressing that psychophysiologic moment when literally a new look occurs. That's what the head tilt is. It's like I used to have my head here. Now I'm going this way and looking at things differently. And there's a smile, sometimes depending on what the insight is. There's a smile and tears of joy, tears of sadness kind of tears. Like now I actually see what happened back then or, whatever. But to me, that's always what it's about, is to have that core moment happening, because it's intrinsic to being human. It's not like some people have it and others don't. No, it's intrinsic. We all do. The question is, how much do you allow yourself access there, or how tightly, is a certain view or certain behavior pattern held, right? Behaviorally or affectively or by thoughts, beliefs, whatever. And that's really what Neuroptimal is about the interrupts are an invitation. I always loved Thich Nhat Hanh's thing. He really hated saying, strike the bell, like the meditation bell. He said, no, we invite the bell to sound. Right? So it's that invitation, right? The interrupt is not like forcing you. It's calling you, right? And it's calling you to say, okay, wake up. Are you here? What's actually happening now? Because, 90% of the catastrophes that we experience are just in our head. They don't actually happen, And so how do you get out of your head? All the thoughts you have every day, you continue to have a lot of them every day. Like so much, like it's going to really make a difference. If I do it 5 billion times, then maybe I'll change it, but, and so that was really the quest. And the challenge for me was getting technology to be readily available that could support the kind of mathematical operations that I wanted to do, that I knew I wanted to do, because of Carl Priblin's work and some other things as well, that pointed to a very different view than what was predominant at the time in terms of neuropsych and what the functioning is and how things work. And what was always so much fun when Carl and I did a lot of presenting together, which we did for a number of years at the various conferences. He was a neurosurgeon, and he's like, the scalpel was never far away from him. You know, he always wanted to know what he called the go of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's happening in the tissue, right?
Right.
What's really going on, right? The tissue and the, you know, the neurotransmitter, you know, the whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, Carl, I'm so glad you're doing that because I have no interest. What intrigues me is the operating system.
Mm-hmm.
So you think like the operating system of a computer, and that's not to say the brain is a computer. No, it's more like the entire World Wide Web.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and maybe if you had the entire World Wide Web, you get about a 4 or 5 year old in terms of consciousness and ability. But still, it's so massively interconnected, and interconnected not just physically, but operationally. So much interconnects. That's why perception, consciousness, and memory all interconnect. And that's really what the holodynamic model is all about. It's how it is all a holodynamic system that's self-organizing. But I'd say what I'm fascinated with is that I can reach through the software directly into that in the language of the central nervous system, and it takes care of it because that's just what it does. That's how it's been evolved. So all I kind of have to do is, you know, like, okay, are you here? And the brain can look around and go, oh, wow, this is different. I was back terrifying myself about, I have a flight that I'm taking tomorrow and I hate to fly, you know?
Right.
It's always interesting, too, because I was a psychotherapist for a long time, and I taught psychotherapy skills and all that stuff, solution-oriented, rapid transformation, all that kind of thing. And it's always interesting because when people would say, well, I'm scared to fly, I go, you're not scared to fly. They say, oh, yeah, I get on the plane, you know, the bomb's not. I say, no, you're not scared to fly. You're scared to crash. Mm-hmm. And while you're in the plane, you're showing yourself an in-flight movie of the plane crashing, and you're the star. And you're sitting there having that experience, you know, and your brain just has experience, and the body goes, holy shit, we're about to die, or, you know, whatever. And, like, you know, how many times has it happened? You know, has it ever happened for you that, you know, yeah, no, of course not. So, okay, maybe this time the catastrophe will happen. Yeah, it might, but, you know, right?
So I just wanted to let you know that one of the questions I had for you has been answered by this day. And, you know, several people have said to me, you know, all things nonlinear dynamical. Well, that's off-putting. You know, well, I don't eat pudding anymore, so I was like baffled by that.
Right.
But it was confusing and too scientific and so on and so forth. But, you know, and I do want you to answer this, but I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so I put together my article on X to be, you know, that will be completed once this our interview is over, and you know I get the transcript and whatnot, summarize it and everything. But I put it up there, and the intention is that it's a breadcrumb tool to go back through, you know, the things that you're talking about, and you know review of it, and maybe you know offer a little more information. But you know, look. Sorry, Elon Musk and your ex-support team, but your articles are buggy because, you know, I would publish the article, think I had it all cherried out, you know, my media in the right place, my links, so on and so forth. And it would go back to various versions, and I'd see text in a place that I had not placed it, and I'd see media missing. So, you know, I did 12 renditions of that. Yeah, so, you know, all in the idea of making this as palatable and as helpful as possible. So there was fear, you know, fantasized experience of an awful reality that you taught me years ago. And, you know, and then we were talking before this, and it didn't work on Safari, and, you know, there's a dinner, you know, in traffic and whatnot. that's nonlinear dynamical.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes,
the
it
whole
is.
thing to me is like, wow, it's a lesson for me because I wanted you to explain it, and I know you will, then explain it better than me. But this whole thing has been an amazing journey in one day just to get to this
Well,
place.
yeah, it's interesting because or an aspect of it that's very interesting is we have to come up with a new term that is the contrary term to what everybody has learned. So
Hmm.
it's called non-linear. Well, because of course the world is linear. Well, no, it's not, but that's what you're taught growing up. You know,
Right.
parallel lines never meet. Yeah, you draw them on a piece of paper or a tabletop. That's true, right? Try drawing it on a balloon. No, right? It depends. And they probably, it's almost certain that they're going to cross at some point. So, what happens when a spaceship goes through, you fly to the moon. And I love how the movies show this kind of stuff. It's like, they take off from Cape Canaveral or wherever, and then they're going to the space shuttle for for the space station, sorry, for their first stop, and they're still on full thrust.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no, that's not how you do it, guys. You know, and it's fascinating because you think about a spaceship going, or a satellite, let's say, going from here to Saturn. And most people imagine it as if it's just a straight shot like you get on Interstate 80. And, sooner or later you get to Iowa City. Doesn't matter if you're going east or west. But the truth is that's just not how it works at all because the planets are gravity wells. And so you wrap around this planet, then you wrap around that one, and you get a slingshot effect from it. And you finally
Mm-hmm.
get to where you want to get to. And that's part of the reason it takes so long. Because you're doubling the transit or whatever, depends on the transit time. So we have a special construct called a geodesic for that kind of linear movement in a four-dimensional space-time continuum. Well, actually, that's the basis. The straight line is the idealization that only exists on a flat piece of paper, But
Exactly.
that's the model. Why? Well, because it was really useful. It worked. And for most of the planet, most people, most of the daily life kind of stuff, it works. You're adding up your grocery bill. Yeah, it's going to be a linear process. You don't add one little thing and suddenly the total is 10 times the cost, right? It's directly proportional. So to me, it when I hear a term like nonlinear, it's showing that juxtaposition of sort of this privileged, stratified, linear, hierarchical construct of the world, and it's just not that way. Really, the reality is almost everything that is physically real is nonlinear in its structure. In other words, it's not linear. To linearize it, we have to constrain it. We have to cut it off. We have to, so the piece of paper, it has edges, right? It's a piece of paper. And you say, well, I can imagine it going on forever. As a sheet of paper? Really? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Show me where that exists. An infinite sheet of paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fascinating construct, but you assume that's the basis. No wonder things are tough for you when you get in the real world. The real world is nonlinear, right? It's not linear. You make a little difference at the beginning, and you can be in totally different places. I used to give the example about going to an airport. And when you go to the airport because you're going to fly someplace, you get to the gate where the plane's going to be. Well, you could be flying to Cleveland. The next gate is going to Beijing.
Mm-hmm.
50-foot of difference. Yeah, but 10,000 miles of separation at the end, right? So where you start does not necessarily predict where you're going to go, is another way of saying sensitive dependence on initial conditions. You get on the wrong plane, you're on the wrong side of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only a 50-foot difference at the start.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it seems that's difficult for people to get, even though that's reality, that's life. Because, you go to the supermarket, there's a can of soup, and right next to it is another can of soup. And you go, yeah, well, they're the same. It doesn't really make that much difference. And if they stack them 4 deep, it's still the same. Yeah, in that very constrained environment, it's linear. I get it. It's discrete, You start going in other environments, and all those distinctions fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
So we say, well, there's energy and mass, and, nothing can go faster than the speed of light, because there's this speed limit in the universe, and light is the speed limit. It's like, that's not what the equation says. The equation says we have no idea what happens as you get to the speed of light, because that fundamental mathematics at that point is based on that separation. So mass gets increasing, energy gets, what's happening here? Time slows down, or it speeds up, or it's relative to this or that. And that seems odd to us because we have this belief that, we say space-time, it's like there's a 3-dimensional aquarium which moves along a railroad track, which is called time. And that's not the way it is at all. It just isn't. And so our memories are not organized as like ties on the railroad tracks. I have to be careful because it's getting to the place where a lot of people have never actually seen a railroad track or been on a train, so
I'm talking about Jesus Christ Superstar 1970,
yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is
Great
kind
album.
of funny. Yeah. I know people all across the age range, and every now and again I'll be talking to somebody who's, significantly younger than I am, and I'll mention some kind of music or a movie or something, and they'll look at me and they'll go, was that before I was born? It's like, oh, geez, yes, it was. Sorry. It's a good movie.
Wow.
So, what's the
That's
dynamical?
amazing.
Well, the dynamical is that it's changing all the time. We all know that, right? The only constant is change, right?
Mm-hmm.
The more things change, the more they remain the same, right?
Right.
But they're changing how they change also.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just that they're changing, right? But the method or the way or the organizing principle changes. So, when you have an embryo form, now it's very different structurally than it had been when it was these two completely separate things.
Right.
Right? And it's easy to say, well, it's the union of a sperm and an ovum. Well, yeah, okay, but it's kind of what happens then, right? And just how everything changes and how it organizes itself. It's fascinating. I remember back in high school, I was talking to the mother of a friend of mine, and she was, really articulate woman. I mean, just incredibly sharp. And her husband worked as part of NASA at a Goddard Space Center, I believe it was. And she was kind of talking about how, God organizes the world, and, that was her world, and that was great, and I said, well, what about things that don't have a conductor? And she's like, well, what? And I said, well, like a waterfall. Like, who conducts which water drops go where? How does that happen? And, it's like, if you say, well, God does that, okay, but does that help you understand anything more? Right? It's more like, how does that organize itself? How does that embryo continue to grow and divide and split into other organizational levels that all function together. And, the really important things, like how to breathe, right? How to breathe is, nobody teaches you how to breathe. You either do it or you die right after birth, right? Or, how do you learn to walk? Well, you crawl first. Well, how do you learn to crawl? Well, you sit up. And what do you do before that? Well, you roll over. Nobody teaches you how to do those things. They support you so that as your central nervous system, as your, entire psychophysiological, neurophysiological being is evolving, it's a safe enough environment that you can experiment and learn that and coordinate. But we don't think it that way. It's like, now I'm going to teach you how to talk. No, you're not. You're going to talk, and they're going to reply to you. They're going to dance with you in whatever the language is. You don't teach somebody at that level, at that point, how to talk. You may do that later. If they lose speech ability, you may have to help them regain speech, right? Or you may start teaching grammar or some specifics. But the foundation, and that's partly why, brothers and sisters, the older one will say, well, I can translate, It's like that scene in the airplane movie, Oh,
yeah.
I speak jive, right?
Barbara Billingsley.
Yeah, right, yeah. I
Leave it to
speak
Beaver.
jive. Yeah, exactly.
We'll have to put that link in the show notes.
In the show, that's right.
You know me, okay, well.
That's right. Okay, I'll go track that one down too. Yeah, but it's so when you talk about nonlinear dynamical, what's interesting to me is these terms have developed more recently, and they've sort of been created. But that's what happens, right? Like telephone as a term was invented, Computer was invented. It originally referred to the human personnel who hand-calculated artillery trajectories for the military. They would compute the trajectories, and therefore, what was the proper elevation if you wanted to get the shell to land so far away with this piece of artillery, right? And yeah, computers can do that a lot better, a lot faster, and a lot more correctly in that same amount of time as humans can. Of course they can. A lot of other things they can't do yet. We'll see what happens, right? So, same thing with chaos, like chaos math or chaotic math, or it's a chaotic system. Well, it appears to be chaotic in contrast to linear. That's what makes it look chaotic. But, if you drop that set of blinders at the door, it's pretty organized. You just can't say exactly what's going to happen. And that's because it's time intertwined, time entangled, right?
A thought came to my mind. I know you like to talk about hummingbird and the flutter before.
Oh, yes.
But I was also thinking about starlings and their murmuration and,
yes.
Fireflies and lighting up in unison.
Yes.
That's to my way of thinking, what you just said is, there's that, it's chaotic, but there's some structure.
There's some organization, and it emerges out of the process itself. It's not like...
And it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. And part of its beauty is that it isn't so predictable.
Right.
It is unexpected in some ways, but it's predictably unpredictable. Right? So it's not random, even though that's a term that's frequently used. There are very few real random systems. Very few. And they are idealizations in most cases. And, the thing about linear math, and it sounds maybe like I'm trashing it or saying we should throw it out. No, not at all. It's very important in the right place, right? But if all you have is a hammer, the world's going to look like nails, right? It helps to have more tools, Yeah, you could cut a board with a hammer, but it wouldn't be a very clean cut. It would separate it, but and tough to make good furniture that way, right? You need something more precise. But it's not that linear is bad. It's just part of the reason it works so well is because it has no time reference,
Mm-hmm.
and it's reversible. So 1 + 1 is 2.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if it's Thursday as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to Wednesday. It doesn't matter if it's one elephant and 1 + 1 is 2 always. It isn't, like, well, it's not quite 2. It's like 1.9, No, 1 + 1 is 2. Not only that, it doesn't matter when you do it. Doesn't matter how quickly you do it. Doesn't matter how slow you do it, right? Always comes out the same. And interestingly enough, 2 - 1 is always 1. Right? Well, reality doesn't really generally work that way. Okay? You have a relationship that develops. It starts as two separate people in a construct and a grouping of some sort. And then they become their own couple as they dance together through life. And then one way or another, that couple changes. And it may
Mm-hmm.
go back to individuals. It may be that one of them dies. It may be that both of them die. That's the unpredictable part. You don't necessarily know ahead of time. And that's the beauty. And in English, we can say these things. It's different in other languages, but the present is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing that, everybody goes, oh yeah, the sun comes up in the morning. Wow. I mean, just take a moment and think what it would mean if there were a day that the sun didn't come up, And we say, well, the sun comes up. No, the earth rotates, right? It's not like the sun goes away and hides or something, So it's interesting the way we think about things and how that limits us or how that empowers us to go beyond just what we've learned up to that point. Hence the transformational idea, and that it's self-organizing instead of somebody else having to make it so or fix it in a certain way. I don't know if that is of any use anywhere, but
it's a perfect use. And by the way, I have AI tools that will help me figure it out afterwards.
Okay. Good. Let me know.
So,
all right.
Yeah, well, I mean, that dovetails in. If I may, as much, I mean, we're on 43 minutes here, and I know it's after midnight your time.
Oh, that's fine.
So I don't
that
want to
part's
take too
fine
much
right now. Yeah.
Okay, well then let's go. I mean, I'm going to lump these two together if you don't mind. I wanted you to talk a little bit about EEG and brain waves. And also, I have always been so fascinated about your story that I can no longer find the webinar on to go back to, because that's what I do. Oh, wow, that's, okay, put a pin in that. Let me go back to it. But EEG, brainwaves, but then, it's not just existential phenomenology. There's so much more in there. But, you were looking at the structure of the EEG. And could you, kind of riff a little bit on that and how you got to that, was fascinating
to me. Yeah, structure is, existential phenomenology. It's a mouthful.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of the most important thing is it's very much like time-frequency. It's existential phenomenology. And the dash is kind of the most important part. It's phenomenology is essentially the structure of it's putting into language how things appear, how they show. It's not appearance as opposed to what's really going on. It's how does it come forth? How do you encounter it? Okay. And existential refers to the individual existence of each person. So what is the structure of experience, particularly experiences that are shared or they share a language construct? So, you and I can talk about doing neuroptimal sessions, and we both know what that means because there's a structure to that experience. Now, that's a pretty trivial example, but where I went
not to me
for my okay
never mind.
Never mind. Yeah, where I went with that for my doctoral work, because I went to, at that time, it was the only program in the U.S. that was existential phenomenological psychology. So it was a doctorate in that, really. As far as Pennsylvania was concerned, it's psychology. As far as APA is concerned, it was psychology. But, it was a very particular kind of focus. And I was always very interested in the experience in actual transformational work, in what usually gets called therapy. And I was always interested in those phenomena, those situations, those experiences that Carl Jaspers referred to as the borderlands of human experience, which now has become borderline. But it's the places where, you're either with me or against me. It's all or none thinking. And we can all get there. It just depends on how stressed we are. It depends on how high the stakes are for us, right? Do or die. There are a lot of different ways to talk about it. But those experiences happen during therapy and during the therapeutic process. And they manifest frequently for the therapist as having some kind of strong reaction to what's happening. And so what's the real structure of that experience was what I was interested in. And it's kind of a prototype for me of transformational experience, except that it's sort of seen ubiquitously, seen everywhere as negative. In fact, there are a lot of therapeutic traditions which kind of have the, oh, no, that should never happen. You have to be pure and separate from, and, Fritz Perls, in one of his little jewels, he wrote this book called In and Out the Garbage Pail, and it was kind of an autobiographical riff on his experiences as originally Freudian and Jungian, and then getting out on his own kind of thing. But he kind of summarized that idea with a cartoon that he drew, which was the patient lying on the traditional, chaise longue couch of the analyst, and the analyst behind the desk sitting upright in a chair with a gas mask on. Right? That's really kind of funny. Anyway, so for me it was like, okay, what's the experience? What actually happens? And that focus is always there for me. It's like it dovetails into Karl Popper's, what do you have to do to have that experience? What do you have to do to get this result in a scientific experiment? How can you operationalize it? These are all different ways of saying the same thing, right? Because, what does a computer do? Well, it does things to get certain results for you, right? So how do you do that? How do you organize the resources so that you get a fairly linear response? That is, if you type in 1 + 1, you want to always get 2. Right? You don't want to get 53. Okay? So how does that happen? How does that get experienced? How do you co-create, would be the way it's said in existential phenomenology land. because it's not that I make it happen or you make it happen. You know, you don't make me feel bad. I don't make you feel bad. But both of us can feel bad based on our interaction, right? It's not like, oh, it's all your fault. That's how come I'm that way. No, not at all. It's, I contribute. We dance. It's a dance, right? And if you understand that, you can, if you understand and accept that as a working premise, you can say, well, okay, I'm really angry right now. How did that happen? What's the structure here? It's very easy to go, oh, well, you pissed me off, man. You know, you did whatever. Okay, maybe, right? It's not like I'm saying people don't do things that get you annoyed. But what do you do about getting annoyed instead of, say, walking away or instead of laughing? Right? What's the structure? What's the unfolding of these experiences? You know, another way to gloss on it, it's become in sort of popular psych is, you know, fake it till you make it. That is, you find out the structure of what someone successful, let's say, did to create, to evolve, to tumble into that success. What did they do to make that happen, right? What was their part in the doing that created it, right? And if you do that kind of stuff, it's more likely that you're going to get that kind of result instead of if you do things completely the opposite way, right? So, you know, fake it till you make it is the superficial way to say it. It really means act in ways and think in ways that other people have done. You know, Jack Nicklaus at one point was asked about, you know, like, what does he do when he three putts? And his response was, I never three putt. And the guy in the audience who was asking the question, well, don't you remember at this tournament? No, I never three putt. Well, yeah, you did. No, I never three putt. You know, because for him, that was a way he was organizing his experience. So the expectation that he had was that he wouldn't three putt and he didn't have to worry about three putt and he wouldn't have to worry about it. It's just, he always two putted it at most. Right?
Exactly.
And if there was a counter, he would just kind of delete it, you know, and it's a fascinating thought, you know, and most golfers probably say, oh, no, I three putt this much. Well, now you've set an expectation for yourself, you know, and what's going to happen if you have that round where you don't three putt? You're going to go, oh, geez, can we play that again? I screwed up. I didn't three putt this time, you know, right? But see, it's when you allow yourself to think of the possibilities, all kinds of things emerge. So when I was getting back into EEG and other forms of biofeedback, because I'd first been exposed to that actually back in high school, but especially when I was at Georgetown, it was trying to become a psychophysiological program in many ways. There are people that are very interested in that. So, of course, we were into monitoring systems and, you know, all this kind of cool stuff. It was very clear to me that the technology just wasn't up to snuff. It just couldn't, you know, you're trying to fly to the moon using the Wright brothers flyer. You know, it's not going to work. I don't care how much you work on it, right? It's just not there. And what I was especially interested in was how elaborated this belief had come, this perspective that the brain produces waves, and these waves organize in certain ways. And if you produce alpha waves primarily, well, you'll kind of relax and have a pleasant experience or that kind of a thing, right? The brain doesn't rave. It's a collection of oscillators. Now, yeah, you can represent oscillatory behavior as a wave structure if you want, if that's useful. But if you do that, you're leaving out almost the most important aspect of that phenomena, which is the phase angle. because you think it's a wave because you're used to seeing it on that flat piece of paper called an EEG trace. But what's actually getting displayed that way is a spiral. And it's a jiggy-jaggy spiral, but it's a spiral. So if I come at you, it looks more like this, like a corkscrew to take out a wine cork, out of a wine bottle. And really, that phase angle of the rotation is a very important component. And of course, that varies with time, just like the frequency does. So it's really important to look at all of those jointly, hence joint time dash frequency, right? So looking at it, flat against the wall in a flat piece of paper, it is like taking the butterfly and pinning it to the wall so you can see how it flies. That's how you never see it fly, right? So why would you try to study it that way? That doesn't make a lot of sense, And so I was very intrigued because these characterizations of EEG, what are you really measuring when you measure EEG? It's voltage drop. The rest is how you account for that voltage drop. Yeah, you can do spectral analyses and then you say, oh my goodness, look, here's what everybody else calls alpha. Well, why was it called alpha? Because the first people who observed it realized that if you were tracking this thing, if people closed their eyes, a lot of those people had a certain change in that signal. And that became known as alpha. How come? Because it was the first one that was identified. Okay? But now it's become like, oh, these are alpha waves. Yeah, okay. They could have called them, I don't know, zeta waves or something, but, whatever. Anyway. So I've been interested not in what brainwaves change during neurofeedback, for instance, because to me that's kind of, like, well, we have retrograde motion in the planets. No, you don't. That's just because you're doing Ptolemaic astronomy or astrology, okay? It's a certain view. Yeah, you put the Earth at the center of the solar system, you're going to have planets and everything else doing retrograde motion. But you put the sun at the center, it just simplifies the math, It's not like, but of course doesn't match common everyday experience from centuries ago, right? Anyway, I was interested in the whole point of doing neurofeedback for me is to facilitate personal transformation. So how about if you look at the structure of transformational experience doing neurofeedback instead of what brain waves are predominating? Now, the identification in the field historically, and for good reason too, I'm joking a lot when I say these things, but it's a respectful joking. It's because, if you keep digging the same hole deeper and deeper, you're not going to get anywhere else, right? So time to maybe look somewhere else to see just a little different, right? I was always interested in how do we make the experience of being in a neurofeedback session as transformational as possible. I was never interested, really, in characterizing brain states or something, because the brain's always changing. It's a nonlinear dynamical system. So to say it's in a state, it's kind of like, what do you mean, like Rhode Island? It's in a state. Okay, now it's in Texas? I mean, what do you mean? Well, no, see, it's, and now, of course, we have the DMN, whatever, the default modulation network or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah. Default mode network. Yes.
There we go.
Default mode network.
Yeah. And it's like, no matter what, there has to be a state. And there has to be an organization to that state. And then it gets pulled in other directions,
You had a marvelous answer to somebody asking about this default mode network. And you said, well, here's another example of somebody trying to thingify.
Yeah, exactly. Or it's but you kind of understand it because, in a sense, it is a fake it till you make it kind of thing. It's like, okay, we studied these people who were meditators, for instance, and this is what we saw in the
Mm,
EEG when they did their meditation. Now, this is what we saw because we used this kind of equipment at this time and we were looking that way,
right.
and,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if we can get them to produce something like that, maybe they'll have the same experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, fair enough. Great idea in many
Yeah.
ways. Okay. Because
Yeah.
after all, that's just a more time compressed version of, okay, there's that, Abbott, there's the head monk here, and he's a really cool dude, the way he thinks and the way he behaves and the way he moves. I want to be like him. I want to have that experience. How did he get there? Well, he meditated or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I'll meditate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do I know I'm doing it okay? Well,
Exactly.
the abbot will come along and say, okay, straighten up, dude. Or, breathe differently. Or, can you hear the sound of the bell even before? Right. And, who were you originally before your parents were even born? It's like to kick you out of the sedimented ways of thinking
Mm-hmm.
and realize that, okay, here it is. This is it. This is it. You know, there's
Right.
nothing more than this is it. And this is more than enough. How do you make it not enough? What do you have to do to make this not enough?
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Right.
That's the structure of disappointment. And the best way to disappoint yourself is to have expectations. Because if the expectations get fulfilled, you just get to be satisfied. You can't be excited. It just becomes ho hum.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your questions at all,
Well,
but
it,
you
it,
know,
it, it got a part of it, and we can carry this conversation on another time. I did want to mention to you, and I don't know if you got a chance to take a look at the show notes. One of my favorite, you uh, helped me to learn about Carl Preben and your
right, right,
magnificent journey with him, and I love that story. I found, I was starting to search for, his interviews,
oh
anything
yeah,
I could find. I
hmm
did the same thing when I was working with Bill O'Hanlon and
right,
Milton Erickson. I was looking for
right,
things that I could grab about Milton that, is kind of kept in a vault, because
right, right,
I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm cool with that. There's a
right.
lot of stuff out there. I came across an interview from Jeffrey Mishlove, a thinking, what did he call it? A thinking aloud DVD, and Carl
Okay,
was there. And it's interesting to
yeah.
see Carl in different hairstyles, by
Oh, that's right.
the
That's right.
way.
Yes,
you know,
yeah,
you actually had the existential phenomenological experience looking at his hair.
yeah, right,
I
right,
I get to watch it on YouTube, and the
right.
one quote that has always stuck with me, and Jeffrey kind of helped him, with the quote, but was
Articulated.
that
Yeah,
yes, in every part of the brain lies the whole of our experience in terms of perception and memory in regards to hologram.
exactly. Yes.
And I mean, that has always been just right there. Oh my gosh, there it is.
Yep.
And
hmm
when you were talking about the fault mode network and whatnot, I mean, again, it's this, and if this is your phrase, it's this, and in terms of EEG, electrical activity, it's this globally interwoven, dynamical flow of information.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
that just, when I saw that coming from you, I'm like, those are the two quotes I put together.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Well, that is the essence of it, and in that sense, it makes sense to think of what Carl was working on as the holography, the holographic, if you will, model of how brains function. Because
mm-hmm.
remember, for me, there's function and structure, if you think as a
Right.
neuropsychologist, right? The structure is what he was really interested, the physical stuff, right? The go of it, as he would say.
Mm-hmm.
I was always much more interested in the overall functional organization. How do
Mm-hmm.
things work that way? Not where are they supposed to be working? Because the thing that is really true, everybody cites the Gonzaga research from, I think it was the late 60s, the split brain stuff, it was intractable EEG seizure inactivity, and they severed the corpus callosum, and that decreased the daily seizure activity to a manageable, medically manageable level. And because, Gonzaga had access to these people, he was able to do this really interesting stuff with visual field and could demonstrate, if he sufficiently constrained the visual access, if he put the word yellow but in green letters and funneled it to just one side of the brain initially, it would come out differently seen than if it was funneled to the other side, because the one is language-based primarily was his working hypothesis. So they would see the word yellow. The other side was not language-bound, and it would see the green color. And so it'd say, oh, it's green. And so everybody said, oh, yeah, right, there's the left, right, and, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and, et cetera, where all that went. That wasn't the really most interesting part to me. What was most interesting to me is if you looked at the actual research, what they recorded from the people in these experiences, depending which side they were shown first, which side of the visual field, they go, oh, yeah, that's yellow. No, wait a minute, it's green. No, oh, it's the word yellow written in green.
Mm-hmm.
It was like the third iteration, it integrated, right? It's like period 3 behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Third integration. And that got bypassed. But it's like, no, that's how the thing works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, you separate it, you split it, you artificially constrain it. It will work around that as quickly as it can. That's just how it works, okay? And you have to do an awful lot to get that separation, even for that first iteration of it. And to me, that is what puts the constraint, if you will, around the structural view, meaning the physical structure of the brain. Yeah, it may be that the speech center is over here and the, whatever. Or largely it is, or more often it is, et cetera, et cetera. But what's fascinating to me is how it can migrate in the case of damage. It doesn't work that way in a warehouse. You have stuff over here. It doesn't move itself to another area if the wall collapses outside. You have to go in and work to do that. Well, central nervous system is set up to be this massively interconnected operationally as well as structurally thing. And it self-organizes, right? You don't have to teach it how to recognize, the difference between green and yellow. Yeah, people learn that, they go to school and all of that. But the color difference is pretty clear unless you're colorblind. Mm-hmm. So you're building on what's there intrinsically, naturally, if you will. And then it's further refinements over time, right? It's not like, oh yeah, now we're going to teach you this totally separate thing, No, it doesn't work that way. It's holographic. It's more interconnected than it isn't. So, I don't know if that riffed on what you were talking about either, but
No, absolutely. I'd like, another thing that I have enjoyed learning in combination with others from you is your thoughts on breath as a tool, if you will.
Right.
And you know, years ago, before I knew who Valdeane W. Brown was, I came across Andrew Weil's "Breathing: The Master Key to Self-Healing," and
Right.
you have always, kind of reminded me of what the real meaning of that was. Do the exercise, do the exercises. And you had put it in a way, and I'm paraphrasing. You had put it better than I did. It's your sentiment. But let the universe fill you. You
Yes.
breathe out,
That's right.
and you let the universe fill you. And
Yes.
that I have always appreciated.
Yeah, I was always intrigued that the general recommended course is take a deep breath. No. Empty it fully, as much as you can, and then let go. Because nature abhors a vacuum. The lungs will fill, right? And it's fascinating if you really do that, because it's so embedded in a lot of our cultures, even the cultures of breath work or the cultures of, Buddhist practice, for instance, right? And focusing on the breath in various ways. I think a thing that was not as clear was that importance of breathing out so that you actually literally release into the environment. And then you can be present because it fills you. It's here.
Yeah.
You have to release your thoughts. You have to release your, hardened perceptions, if you will. Instead of walking outside at night and going, oh yeah, there's the moon. Right? It's like, wow, moon. That's amazing. Because everything is a miracle if you just let yourself really see and experience it.
Another universe reference, and everything being, an experience and whatnot. I remember when my mother was still alive, and I was at the Pines at Placerville in the parking lot with the dog, Molly, the Pointador. And, I was running late and whatnot, and I had a very important meeting after, spending time with Mother. That's a story for another time. But I'm walking, briskly to the car. The dog's, doing, tugging and whatnot. And doggone it, here I am all dressed up and everything, and a bird crapped on me.
Right.
And back in the day, I was more posty on Facebook and whatnot. Woe is me. Woe, my life.
Yeah.
So I posted that, and you came back with, "That's just the universe letting you know you're alive." Fun time. Hey, I want to wrap this up, and I would love to have you back. And we have, there are more questions, and as this podcast gains viewership, I know that people are going to want to ask questions, and we're going to put this on Spotify. And I may put some clips or divide it. I don't know yet. I'm just thinking, but I'm going to have really good notes, and hopefully a really good transcription for you for this.
Right.
But could you do me a huge favor as we wrap this up? And also, I need you to stick around for the outro for it, if you don't mind, because humor me. Okay. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and its relationship to Neuroptimal. Can you give us that, please?
Yeah. There are various ways, various sequences that some of it's set in, but Yoga Narata Vritti Chitta, and yoga, reunification, or unification, integration, Naroda, releasing, letting go. It's also sometimes translated as quieting, as in, letting the waters quiet down after you throw a stone in, right? vritti is to vibrate or to move, and that chitta is consciousness. So there are a lot of ways to translate it because Sanskrit, like many Eastern languages, is much richer in structure and in meaning than English. So how do you reunify? Well, you release the disturbances in consciousness. Mm-hmm. You release the rippling in consciousness. You let it go. And that reunifies you. That pulls you back to what's real. Because the only thing that's real is now.
Exactly.
Everything else is illusion. Yeah, and you may say, well, I survived this experience. Yeah, that's great. If you survived Titanic sinking, I guarantee you'd never forget the concept lifeboat. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that you need to drag one around with you everywhere you go. Right?
Exactly.
So that's past, and you can live in the past, and that's a great way to be depressed, for instance, to be sad. Oh my God, it used to be this way and now it's not. Oh, woe is me. I used to have a clean suit. Now I've got a new decoration on it. Right? Yeah, exactly. Couldn't you have waited another half second? Come on. Yeah.
I've got an interview.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And same thing with the future. It's like, if you're catastrophizing about what hasn't happened yet because it could.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, geez, once it happens, you can no longer catastrophize about it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So,
right.
So really it's about so many different ways to talk about it, but it's return to the present, because you can't stay in the present. But in another sense, you can't leave it either.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so, how can you be there at all if you can't leave? How can you stay if you have to get there? Mm-hmm. These are all the sort of language games around these concepts, right? But people say, well, stay in the present, take a deep breath. Whoa. Okay, good. If we had you hooked up to physiological monitoring, when you take that deep breath in, you'll see all the tension levels go up while you're doing that, right? On the other hand,
it's that task-oriented stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, I'm going to make myself be present. Yeah, right.
It's that video player. Okay, if I'm in the right sweet spot, it's going to be open wide and beautiful audio, and all I could get was this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's funny how, movies get made, and I think two moments out of war movies which always stand out for me. One is the story, and they captured it really well in the more recent Midway movie, when John Ford was on Midway, and he was there at the time, and he was trying to film something that was actiony, and of course nothing was happening yet. And he kind of said, yeah, my buddy said, come here because something's going to happen. It's going to be pretty cool. And I think that was just a load of hogwash. And then, of course, here's the attack, and it's for real. And, the cameraman who was filming, dives to the ground and he goes, no, keep shooting, keep the movie going. This is what we're here for, right? Because here it is. And he can't go, okay, cut. Can you guys do that again, please? And all of you act surprised. The other is in
for me, please.
Yeah, really. The other one is the section in Tora, when they're showing the actual attack, and there's a Navy cruiser that goes by, right? And it was supposed to be the Nevada actually trying to get to the harbor, right, to the exit to get out, right? Well, the cameraman missed half of the shot. So all you see is the stern, halfway through and, you can't repeat it. You can't go, okay, can you guys go back and do it again? Cue the planes, come on back, same thing, right? It's okay, well, we missed it, right? The present is the present. And the question is, what do you do with it? Right? So the rest is just illusion. And, you see all the movies nowadays, and it's like, do you know how many takes they had to do to get that to happen?
Exactly.
It's like, whoa, that's not life, right? That's why it's called acting, it's performance.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it really is about looking at the structure of things. How do you really relax when you breathe out? What do you do at the end of your life? You breathe out for your last breath. That's how it goes, right? So at the end of every yoga sequence, every yoga session, what do you do? Well, you do corpse pose. Why do you do corpse pose? Because that's where you're going.
Mm.
And it's a great reminder that in the end, it all lets go. And can you stay present? Can you return to the present in letting go? Now, that doesn't mean you don't try hard or you don't put effort in. It's not that kind of a thing, right? But don't overdo it. Don't overwork to try to make it perfect. No.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know if that helped either, but
Well,
I'm having fun, so
I am too, and just that final thought, the interrupts and the concept of negative feedback, not being negative, but is it the music in addition to the interruptions that offers that takeaway of information that is negative feedback that helps offer the orienting response to the brain? Or would you say that differently?
No, there are several different meanings to negative in negative feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And also its companion phrase, negative reinforcement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because a lot of the field believes that neurofeedback is really operant conditioning. And so they do various of the schedules. Well, there are 4 schedules for reinforcement, 4 different kinds of schedules. And if you really want to get a behavior established and maintained, you have to use all 4. And it works best in a certain sequence, right? And that's not necessarily that germane to here, but it's just to say most have a very limited idea of what operant conditioning really is. Because they also don't understand what reinforcement is. V.F. Skinner, Fred Skinner, used to say, I just put marks on my page. So the behavior happens, he puts the mark on the page, right? That's the idea. He's not looking at the motivation, he's not looking at anything else, except when that behavior happens, what came just before it. Or some version of it. There are ways to parse that a bit with time delays and all that. But it's basically, I'm just counting the marks. I don't care what the behavior is. It doesn't matter. Okay? What is a positive reinforcement? Well, a reinforcement is something that increases the probability of the operant desired occurring. So you want to increase how many times the rat presses the bar or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Or the pigeon pecks at the food dish to make a reaction, right? Positive reinforcement is giving something that increases the probability of that behavior occurring. That's the classic, electronic M&M in neurofeedback. You give a beep when the conditions have been met. There you go. That's reinforcing, right? And some people even call it a reward. No, it's not. It just increases the behavior probability. That's all. That's why if you scream and yell and argue with your adolescent, you get more screaming and yelling and arguing. It's positively reinforcing, right? It increases the probability, Doesn't mean don't do it. It's just know what you're doing, right? So what's negative reinforcement? It's not punishment. It's not making somebody feel bad. It's removing something that increases the probability that the operand's going to occur. So it's reinforcing, but it's reinforcing by removing. It's like positive hallucination, negative hallucination. Positive hallucination, you experience something that isn't there. Negative, you don't experience something that is there. You remove it. Okay? So negative and positive feedback are referred to the process that's involved. Okay, so we do negative reinforcement and negative feedback. Why do we do negative feedback? Because basically, some people say it as the psychophysiology is all about control or inhibit, right? Mm-hmm. I like the sailboat analogy much more. You know, we have the expression 3 sheets to the wind, referring to somebody who's drunk. And, you know, the obvious question is, why are we talking about linen? 3 sheets? Why not 3 pillowcases? Right. Well, right. A sheet is a line, is a control line, like a piece of rope, if you will. And the simplest rig for a sloop has 3 control lines for the sails. One for one side of the boat, for one the other, and, you know, that kind of a thing, right? So if you're 3 sheets to the wind, you've released all your ways of controlling. And what's going to happen? Well, you're going to get blown wherever the wind and the current takes you. But if the sailboat is designed correctly, and it's not for racing, it's for general enjoyment, that boat is going to point itself up into the direction of the wind if it can. Why is that? Because it's not going to go anywhere then. That's like putting it in park, kind of, except, you know, it does move. It moves with the current then, mostly, right? So that's negative feedback. You don't have to correct to get back to pointing the wind. If you let go of the control, it will take itself there. That's the overwhelming control systems in psychophysiology. It's negative feedback. It's to come back to a stasis or, you know, a dynamical stasis, a hollow dynamism, if you will, right? Because stasis sounds like a state. It's not. It's a range of stability or resilience, okay? So why do we use negative? Well, because if you use positive feedback, it's like having the microphone that in the same proximity and close enough proximity to the speaker that amplifies that input, you'll get that squeal ultimately. It's positive feedback. Right. It keeps increasing the signal, right? And so you overshoot the level that you want. So what do? Well, you turn the volume up until you squeal, and then you turn it back down. So you're just below the squeal point. Well, that's that range, right? You never actually hit that sweet spot. So if you try to do positive feedback, you're going to always overshoot your target. Always. It's inherent in the process. Mm-hmm. And since most of the early approaches in neurofeedback were done with positive reinforcement, right? What did you do? Well, we trained them until they got too excited, till they got too intense, till they got too, you know, focused. And we knew that because they started having headaches. So then we backed it off and we started training them to, you know, release more, to relax more. So we did, you know, beta up and then SMR down, or the other way around. You know, they were too anxious, so we did SMR down. Oh, they fell asleep. Okay, now we're going to beta them back up, right? But you never hit like the sweet spot because you're positively feeding back desired states in the extreme, rather than using a self-centering mechanism like the sailboat, where if you interrupt a sound that's there, and it's a natural sounding sound, so it's melodic, it's not just beep or something like that, right? The central nervous system detects difference. That's one of its primary functions. And in detecting difference, it will orient back to the present to see, okay, what's going on? You know, if you are a parent and you have, you know, kids, at some point you're going to say, you're going to have that experience where you go, wait a minute, what's going on? It's too quiet. Mm-hmm.
Real briefly, my daughter, when she was younger, flapped her feet. So, I
Yeah.
knew where she was and everything. And she was very deceptive because she got really quiet with those feet when she was
Of
doing
course.
stuff.
That's right. Right. Because it was self-centering for her.
Mm-hmm.
It was self-reinforcing. And that sounds like, oh, it wasn't good. No, it was promoting resilience for her, is how I would understand that.
Nice.
And if that's the only tool you have in your toolbox, you're going to use it a lot.
Exactly.
Right? So it's like, okay, let's see if we can broaden out the toolbox a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Anyway. Yeah.
Well, you're at a later hour than I am, and I'm getting tired. It's been a long day, and I am so happy and grateful and thankful to have had this opportunity with you, because it was so important to me to launch the off-putting titled show properly.
Right.
And guess what? You and I are eating pudding right now, some really good pudding. And again, I'm just very grateful to you for many reasons, but I really do appreciate this. And I would like for us to do this again, if at all possible.
Absolutely.
Because I can think of so many other things that and I don't want a ball hog here. Let's get other people in and ask you the questions they want to ask. But the show needs to develop and get that.
Yeah, of course.
Get those legs, so to speak. If you will indulge me, I want you to have a wonderful evening. But we're going to go to the show outro now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. No worries.
All right.
And I've really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I have as well. And without further ado, here's Freddie.
Wow. That was exciting, wasn't it? Non-linear dynamical? Yes, indeed. I get it now. And wasn't the rest of this podcast amazing? Thanks so much, Val. Absolutely cracking. This sets the stage for the rest of these amazing podcasts, of course. Next up on All Things Non-Linear Dynamical, talks about the brain and human connection, is another extremely special guest, a marvelous storyteller and somewhat of a kindred spirit of mine as a songwriter. Perhaps we can collaborate on a theme song for this show. He's Bill O'Hanlon, and he has an extremely non-linear dynamical life journey to thrill us all with. This show is scheduled for 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on Monday, June 3rd, 2024. So I'll see you then. Cheers and be well. Ta-ta all.
Yes.
And with that, have a good evening. Sleep well, my friend.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. Bye.